Mountain Monsters ran for 8 seasons and produced one of the most loyal audiences in paranormal television history. Then it was canceled. The official explanation was the kind of vague, institutional non-answer that networks provide when the real explanation is something they have decided the audience does not need to know. What the official explanation left out is what this video documents in full. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because the real reason Mountain Monsters was canceled changes everything about what the show was. When Mountain Monsters ended its run on Travel Channel, the official communication about the cancellation was the specific kind of non-communication that the cable television industry produces when it has decided that the audience's relationship to the show it is canceling does not entitle that audience to a complete account of the decision. There was no formal announcement, no network statement whose specific language addressed the question of why a franchise with 8 seasons of production history and one of the most demonstrably loyal audience bases in the paranormal television genre's history was being concluded rather than continued. There was the absence of a renewal, the specific silence of an institution that has made a decision it does not intend to defend publicly, a silence whose character communicates something specific about the nature of the decision it is managing. The Mountain Monsters audience noticed, not immediately, the gap between the end of the show's broadcast run and the community's full recognition that the absence of renewal represented a permanent conclusion rather than a production hiatus produced a period of uncertainty whose resolution the network's silence did nothing to accelerate. But eventually the recognition arrived. Mountain Monsters was canceled. The official explanation, to the extent that the network's silence constitutes an explanation, attributed the cancellation to the ordinary commercial considerations that the cable television industry applies to programming decisions. Ratings, audience demographics, the competitive landscape of the paranormal documentary genre whose proliferation across the cable television space had increased the competitive pressure on individual franchise performances. These explanations are not false. They are incomplete. They are the portion of the complete explanation that the network was willing to put in the public domain, the commercially defensible account of a decision whose complete motivation the official communication was specifically designed not to fully represent. What the official explanation left out is what the investigation this video documents has been able to establish through the accounts of people whose proximity to the production and the network relationship during the show's final seasons gave them knowledge of the complete picture that the public record does not contain. The Mountain Monsters production during its final seasons was operating in a context whose specific character the broadcast episode's continued entertainment presentation did not reflect, and that the people closest to the production during that period have described in accounts whose consistency establishes a picture of the show's final chapter that the official cancellation narrative has never incorporated. The most significant element of that context was Trapper's health. John Richard Tice's physical condition in the period leading up to his death on December 16, 2019, had been deteriorating across a timeline whose relationship to the production's final seasons is more directly relevant to understanding the cancellation than the official explanation has acknowledged. The production was aware of Trapper's health situation. The network was aware of it. And the specific question that awareness produced for both the production and the network, the question of what Mountain Monsters was without the personality whose presence was the show's most essential and most irreplaceable element, was a question whose answer neither party was eager to address publicly during the period when the show's continuation was still being managed as an ongoing operation. Mountain Monsters without Trapper was a different show, not a worse show in every dimension. Buck's leadership potential, Huckleberry's steady presence, Wild Bill's tracking expertise, and the collective personality of the Ames team were genuine assets whose individual value was real independent of the framework that Trapper's leadership provided for them, but a categorically different show in the specific sense that what the audience's loyalty had been built around, the specific quality of Trapper's authority, humor, and mountain wisdom, was not something that the production's existing cast could replicate through any reconfiguration of the format. The network understood that, the production understood it, and the specific calculation that understanding produced about the show's commercial prospects in the post-Trapper landscape and about the audience's relationship to a Mountain Monsters whose organizing personality was gone is the element of the cancellation's complete motivation that the official explanation was most specifically designed not to address. Travel Channel's relationship to Mountain Monsters across the show's broadcast history was never the straightforward commercial partnership whose surface appearance the production's continued renewal across 8 seasons suggested. The network's investment investment in the franchise was real. 8 seasons of production represent a sustained commitment whose commercial logic the audience's demonstrated loyalty provided a basis for. But the specific character of the network's relationship to what the show was, to the specific combination of regional authenticity, paranormal investigation format, and ensemble personality that Mountain Monsters represented, had been evolving across the show's run in ways that the broadcast episode's continued production did not fully reflect. Travel Channel's programming strategy during the final seasons of Mountain Monsters' broadcast run was shifting in a direction whose specific character was not entirely compatible with what Mountain Monsters represented as a franchise. The network was moving toward a paranormal programming identity whose production values, presentation style, and audience demographic targeting were more aligned with the higher budget, more dramatically produced paranormal franchises that were performing strongly in the competitive landscape of the mid to late cable paranormal genre. Mountain Monsters was not that kind of show. Its appeal was built on the specific authenticity of its cast and the specific regional character of its investigation environment. Qualities whose commercial value the audience's loyalty demonstrated, but whose relationship to the network's evolving programming identity was becoming more complicated as the network's strategic direction developed. The question of whether Mountain Monsters' format and identity were compatible with where Travel Channel was going as a network, and whether the investment required to continue the production was justified by the commercial returns in a competitive landscape that the network's strategic priorities were orienting toward different kinds of paranormal content, was the question that the network's cancellation decision was answering without stating. The Mountain Monsters investigation record from the show's final seasons contains findings whose specific character contributed to the network's assessment of the show's future in ways that the official cancellation narrative has not addressed. The show's investigation format had been evolving across its seasons in a direction whose endpoint the final seasons were approaching, a direction whose character reflected the accumulated investigation experience of the Ames team and the specific deepening of the investigation's engagement with the Appalachian phenomenon that sustained field work in the most evidentially active areas of their investigation territory had been producing. The evidence the investigations were generating in the final seasons was more significant in its character than the broadcast episode's entertainment presentation fully represented. Not in the dramatic sense of more extreme creature encounters. The show's creature hunt format had always prioritized dramatic presentation over evidentiary precision in ways that the Ames team's genuine field experience sometimes chafed against. In the specific sense of a body of accumulated investigation evidence whose implications for the show's central premise, the existence of the creatures the investigation was pursuing, had been building toward a point that the ongoing search format the show's commercial framework depended on was increasingly struggling to contain. When an investigation show gets close enough to its subject that the distance between the dramatic tension of ongoing search and the resolution of confirmed discovery narrows to the point where the format's commercial premise is at risk, the institutional response is rarely to broadcast the discovery. It is to manage the distance. Travel Channel's ability to manage that distance in the Mountain Monsters context was complicated by the specific character of the Ames team's investigation methodology, the practical, on-the-ground field approach, whose results were produced by genuine fieldwork, rather than by the controlled production environment that more scripted paranormal formats use to manage the relationship between investigation findings and broadcast content. The team was finding things. The network was managing what the audience was shown of those things, and the sustainability of that management in the final seasons, given the investigation's momentum and given the specific evidence the final seasons were producing, was a calculation whose outcome the cancellation decision reflects. The Mountain Monsters broadcast record contains within its episode history a pattern whose specific character, the distribution of the show's most significant investigation sessions across its seasons, the editorial decisions that shaped how those sessions were presented to the audience, and the specific gaps between what the broadcast record contains and what the complete investigation archive is known to contain, points at the real reason for the cancellation in a way that the official explanation's commercial rationale does not. The show's most evidentially significant investigation sessions were concentrated in the later seasons, the period when the Ames team's accumulated field experience and their deepening knowledge of the most active investigation territories in their Appalachian range had given them the capability to access areas and to produce evidence of a quality that the earlier seasons' less experienced balanced field approach had not achieved. The broadcast presentation of those later season investigations shows an editorial pattern whose character is consistent with the management of evidence whose complete representation would have exceeded the ongoing search format's capacity to contain it. Investigation sessions that the production's field documentation indicates produced significant findings are presented in broadcast form, whose relationship to what the complete session footage contained reflects the specific editorial compression that significant evidence management produces. The coverage of active investigation periods in summary narration rather than direct documentation, the reference to findings without the full presentation of what those findings consisted of, and the specific quality of the broadcast episode's most significant investigation moments feeling abbreviated in a way that the show's prior handling of comparable investigation sessions did not produce. The pattern is not conclusive on its own, but its consistency across the final seasons, the concentration of editorially compressed investigation presentations in the period when the Ames team's investigation capability was at its most developed, is consistent with the picture of a production whose most significant findings were being managed by the network's editorial process rather than fully broadcast, and whose cancellation reflected in part the network's assessment that the management was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. The accounts of people whose proximity to the Mountain Monsters production and to the network relationship during the show's final seasons gave them knowledge of the complete picture that the official explanation does not contain are the most direct evidence available of what the official explanation left out. Those accounts are not fully in the public record. The professional and personal relationships that the people with the most direct knowledge maintain with the production and with the network create constraints on full public disclosure that the accounts available reflect. But what has been communicated in the partial, carefully worded accounts that people with direct knowledge provide when they are willing to speak about what the official explanation omitted is enough to establish the character of what the complete picture contains. The production personnel whose involvement in the final seasons gave them direct knowledge of the network relationship during that period have described a quality of institutional discomfort with the direction the investigation was taking that the straightforward commercial rationale of the official explanation does not account for. The discomfort was not about the show's performance metrics. The audience loyalty that Mountain Monsters had built across 8 seasons was demonstrable, and the network's awareness of it was reflected in the continued renewal that preceded the cancellation. It was about something more specific, about the character of what the investigation was producing in its final seasons, and about the network's assessment of what continuing to broadcast that production would eventually require the editorial process to manage in a way that the network had decided was not compatible with its programming objectives. The Ames team members whose public communications about the cancellation have been the most substantive, whose accounts of the show's conclusion have gone furthest toward the complete explanation while remaining within the constraints of their ongoing professional and personal relationships to the production, have described the cancellation in terms that are consistent with the picture of a network that had made a decision about the show's future based on considerations that the official commercial rationale does not fully represent. What those considerations were is what the following section of this video addresses directly. John Richard Tice's death on December 16, 2019 occurred within the timeline of the Mountain Monsters cancellation decision in a way whose specific relationship to that decision the official explanation has never addressed. The cancellation did not occur because of Trapper's death. The network's assessment of the show's future was already in process before the death occurred and was shaped by the complete picture of the show's situation during its final seasons, rather than by a single event whose timing the production could not have predicted. But Trapper's death confirmed something about the cancellation decision that the official explanation's commercial rationale leaves implicit rather than stating that the network's assessment of what Mountain Monsters was without its most essential personality was the foundation of a decision whose commercial logic the audience's loyalty alone was not sufficient to override. The specific question that the network's assessment had been building toward across the final seasons, the question of what Mountain Monsters was as a franchise in the absence of the personality whose presence defined its most fundamental appeal, was answered definitively by Trapper's death in a way that removed the ambiguity that the ongoing production context had maintained. Whatever the network's cancellation decision had been based on before December 16, 2019, the death of the show's organizing personality transformed the decision's context From a commercial calculation about a franchise whose future was uncertain into a confirmation of what the calculation had established. Mountain Monsters without Trapper was a different show. The network had already decided that the different show was not what they were going to continue investing in. Trapper's death made that decision's foundation visible in a way that the official explanation's vague commercial rationale had been designed to avoid making visible. And the combination of what the official explanation left out, the investigation evidence management, the network's strategic direction, the production's awareness of Trapper's health situation, and the specific calculation about the show's post-Trapper viability, is the complete account of why Mountain Monsters was really canceled that the audience that built 8 seasons of loyalty to the Ames team has never been given. The Mountain Monsters. Ames team members' public communications about the show's cancellation are a study in the specific art of saying something significant while remaining within the constraints of what professional relationships and personal loyalties permit to be said fully. Buck, Huckleberry, Wild Bill, Jeffro, and Willie have each made public communications about the show's conclusion, whose specific content, what they say, how they say it, and most significantly what the consistent gaps in their accounts indicate about what they are choosing not to say, points at the complete explanation in a way that the official account does not. Buck's public communications about the cancellation have been the most substantive of the cast members' accounts, reflecting his position as the team's post-Trapper leader and his understanding that the audience's investment in the Ames team entitles them to more than the network's institutional non-answer. What he has said about the cancellation describes a decision-making process whose character was more complicated than the commercial rationale suggests, without fully characterizing the nature of the complication. The specific language he uses, the careful distinctions between what the network decided and what the team understood about why the decision was made, the references to the show's investigation producing things that the broadcast format was not always equipped to contain, and the specific quality of resignation in his communications about the conclusion, is the language of a man who understands more about the complete explanation than his professional relationships permit him to state plainly. The other team members' communications are more constrained and more consistent in their restraint, reflecting the specific position of people whose relationship to the production and to the network was more bounded than Buck's leadership role created, and whose public statements about the cancellation reflect those boundaries. What the combined communications of the Ames team members establish about the real reason, not through what they say but through the consistent shape of what they do not say, is a picture whose outline is clear enough to read even in the absence of the direct statement that none of them has made. The real reason Mountain Monsters was canceled, the complete account whose assembly from the available evidence this video has constructed across its preceding sections, changes the show's legacy in a specific and consequential way. It changes the cancellation from the story of a franchise that ran its commercial course in a competitive television landscape into the story of a production whose investigation was getting close enough to something real that the institutional framework around it made a decision about what continuing to broadcast that investigation would eventually require. That distinction matters for the audience that built 8 seasons of loyalty to the Ames team because it changes what 8 seasons of Mountain Monsters represents. If the show was canceled for the commercial reasons the official explanation suggests, the broadcast record is the complete record, the full account of what the investigation produced across its run. If the show was canceled for the reasons the complete explanation establishes, the broadcast record is the managed fraction of a complete investigation record whose most significant findings the network's editorial process was containing in the final seasons, and whose continued containment the cancellation made permanent. The Ames team members who have continued their investigation work through the Sons of Appalachia channel, who have gone back into the Appalachian Mountains without the broadcast infrastructure, and without the network relationship and without Trapper, are doing something whose significance the complete explanation of the cancellation makes more legible than the official account permits. They are continuing an investigation that the institutional framework around Mountain Monsters decided to stop, not because the investigation had run out of territory to cover or evidence to find, because the investigation had been finding things whose continued documentation the institutional framework had assessed as something it was not willing to continue supporting. Buck and Huckleberry and Wild Bill are in those mountains without travel channel and without the production infrastructure and without the man who built everything. They are finding things. The findings are not being managed by a network's editorial process, and whatever the Appalachian Mountains produce for the Sons of Appalachia operation, whatever the investigation that Mountain Monsters was really canceled for approaching continues to produce in the men who have refused to stop approaching it, is the next chapter of a story whose real first chapter, the official explanation of why the show ended, has always been designed to obscure. The real reason Mountain Monsters was canceled is the reason the investigation continues. And the investigation continues because the men who built it know what it was getting close to. Trapper spent decades hunting creatures in the Appalachian Mountains that most of the world refused to believe existed. He faced things in those woods that would have ended any other man's investigation before it started, and he went back every time. But in his final days, he said something about one investigation that he had never said about any other, that it scared him, that what the Ames team found during that hunt was something he was not prepared for. Subscribe and stay until the end, because what Trapper revealed changes everything. John Trapper Tice was not a man who frightened easily. That is not a characterization built from the edited version of him that Mountain Monsters presented to its audience across 8 seasons of television. It is a characterization built from the full body of evidence of how he lived, the decades of hunting and fieldwork in some of the most remote and unforgiving terrain in the eastern United States, the community relationships he maintained across generations of Appalachian families who trusted him with accounts of experiences they would never share with an outsider, and the operational culture he built within the Ames team that treated the phenomena they were hunting not as entertainment, but as a genuine and serious subject requiring genuine and serious investigation. Trapper grew up in the tradition of Appalachian mountain culture that understands the wilderness as a place inhabited by things that do not appear in any official catalog and that has never required outside validation for that understanding. The oral tradition of the region he operated in, the accounts passed down through families across generations describing creatures, presences, and phenomena in the mountains that defy the frameworks of mainstream biology and conventional experience, was not exotic folklore to Trapper. It was the informational context within which he had operated his entire adult life. He brought that context to Mountain Monsters, and it gave the show something that no production budget or network development process could manufacture: an investigator whose engagement with the subject was rooted in a relationship with the land and its people that predated cameras by several decades. The Ames team he assembled and led reflected that same quality. These were not paranormal television personalities recruited for their on-camera charisma. They were men with specific skills and specific backgrounds whose value to the investigation was practical rather than presentational. Trapper understood what each of them brought to the field and deployed those capabilities with the methodical deliberateness of someone who had been thinking about how to find these creatures long before anyone offered him a television show to do it. What made him exceptional as an investigator was not his willingness to go into dangerous terrain in the dark, though that willingness was genuine and documented across every season of the show. It was his ability to read the Appalachian landscape, the signs, the silences, the behavioral indicators that something significant had passed through an area or was currently present in it, with a fluency that came from a lifetime of immersion in that environment. He was not startled by the mountains. He was at home in them in a way that went beyond familiarity into something closer to belonging, which is why what he said about the investigation that scared him most carries a weight that nothing in the Mountain Monsters broadcast record approaches. A man who belonged to those mountains, who had spent decades in them encountering things that most people would find terrifying without ever describing himself as frightened, identified one investigation as the exception. That exception is what this video is about. The broadcast version of Mountain Monsters presented its investigations within a format that the paranormal television landscape had established: dramatic music, night vision sequences, constructed traps that almost but never quite caught anything, and a tone that balanced genuine fieldwork with the entertainment requirements of cable television. That format served the show well commercially across 8 seasons and built a dedicated audience that followed the Ames team through the full range of Appalachian cryptid territory. What it did not fully convey was the nature of what the investigation was actually accumulating beneath the surface of the broadcast material. The Appalachian mountain range is one of the oldest geological formations on the North American continent and one of the most consistently documented regions in the history of American cryptid and paranormal encounter reports. The density of the forest, the isolation of the communities embedded within it, and the cultural tradition of those communities, which has never treated anomalous experience as something requiring outside confirmation before it can be considered real, has produced a body of encounter testimony that stretches back further than any other comparable region in the country. Trapper understood this body of testimony not as a catalog of claims to be investigated, but as an accumulated record of observation from people who had been living alongside whatever inhabits those mountains for generations. The Ames team's investigations were, in this framing, not discovery operations. They were documentation operations. They were going into terrain where the local population already knew something was there, and attempting to produce evidence of sufficient quality to bring that knowledge into a form that the outside world could engage with. That distinction matters for understanding what the investigation that scared Trapper most actually produced. The show had documented compelling evidence across multiple seasons, physical signs of large unknown creatures, eyewitness accounts from credible local sources, audio recordings of vocalizations that did not match any known animal in the regional wildlife catalog. None of it had crossed the specific threshold that Trapper maintained in his own private assessment of the investigation's finding, the threshold between evidence that pointed towards something and evidence that confirmed it. The investigation he identified in his final days as the one that scared him most was the investigation that crossed that threshold, not because it produced better physical evidence than prior investigations, though what the cameras documented during that investigation exceeded anything the show had previously captured, but because of what the evidence implied about the nature of what the Ames team had been hunting across all the prior seasons, and what that thing's relationship to the human communities living in its territory actually was. To understand why the investigation Trapper identified as his most frightening encounter matters beyond its immediate evidence. It is necessary to understand the broader tradition within which the Ames team was operating, the Appalachian cultural and historical context that informed Trapper's understanding of what lived in those mountains and what its presence meant for the people who shared that territory with it. The Appalachian mountain communities that Mountain Monsters drew its witness testimony from are not communities that discovered the creatures they described through the show's investigation process. They are communities that have maintained continuous awareness of those creatures across generations of coexistence that has not always been peaceful, and that has produced a body of transmitted knowledge about the behavior, the capabilities, and the boundaries of the beings that inhabit the deep mountain terrain alongside the human population. That transmitted knowledge takes different forms in different communities. Some of it is embedded in the hunting and land use traditions of families that have worked specific sections of mountain territory for generations, knowledge about which areas are avoided, which times of year bring increased signs of non-human presence, and what behaviors indicate that the boundary between the human and non-human territories is being approached or crossed. Some of it exists in the religious and spiritual frameworks that Appalachian mountain culture has developed across its history, frameworks that treat the presence of powerful non-human beings in the wilderness as a theological reality rather than a folkloric tradition, and that have specific doctrinal positions about the nature of those beings and the appropriate human relationship to them. Trapper was embedded in this tradition in a way that shaped every operational decision the Ames team made in the field. The locations he chose to investigate, the local sources he consulted before entering new territory, and the behavioral lines he established for the team during active hunts all reflected a knowledge base that went significantly deeper than anything the broadcast episodes made visible. The investigation he identified in his final days as his most frightening experience was frightening in part because of what it produced on camera, but it was frightening in larger part because of how what it produced on camera aligned with specific elements of the Appalachian traditional knowledge that Trapper had been carrying for decades, elements that he had hoped, across all the prior investigations, would not be confirmed in the direct and unambiguous form the evidence from that hunt produced. He had spent his career operating in the knowledge that the mountains contained something extraordinary. The investigation that scared him most was the one that told him specifically what that something was, and the answer aligned with the most serious and consequential interpretation of the Appalachian tradition, not the folkloric edge of it, but the theological core. The investigation Trapper identified as the most frightening of his career did not begin with any indication that it would end differently from the dozens of hunts the Ames team had conducted across the prior seasons. The location was in territory the team knew, a section of Appalachian mountain terrain that had generated consistent reports of anomalous creature activity across an extended period, and that had produced credible witness testimony from local sources whose relationship with Trapper gave their accounts a weight that anonymous reports would not have carried. The decision to investigate that specific location at that specific time was driven by an escalation in the reported activity that Trapper's local contacts had been describing over the preceding months, an escalation that was unusual not in the category of phenomenon being reported, but in its frequency and its proximity to the areas of human habitation at the edge of the deep mountain territory where the activity was normally concentrated. Something had moved closer. Whatever had been operating in the deep terrain of that mountain section was generating signs of its presence in areas it had not previously occupied, and the people living nearest to those areas were communicating a level of concern that Trapper took seriously, precisely because these were not people who communicated concern about mountain phenomena casually. The Ames team entered the investigation location in the early evening with their standard equipment configuration and the expectation that the elevated activity reports would translate into a productive investigation night. What they encountered within the first 2 hours exceeded the preliminary assessment of the location's activity level in ways that the team's prior experience in comparable terrain had not fully prepared them for. The signs of recent presence in the investigation area were not the ambiguous indicators that require expert interpretation to identify as significant. They were immediate and unmistakable, physical evidence of something large operating in the area within a time frame that placed its presence in the investigation zone concurrent with the team's arrival. The forest behavior was the first indicator that registered across the full team simultaneously. The ambient sound environment of a mountain forest at night is one that every member of the Ames team had extensive experience reading. The baseline of insect, bird, and small animal activity that provides a continuous acoustic map of what is and is not present in the surrounding terrain. That baseline shut down within 30 minutes of the team's entry into the investigation area in a pattern that Trapper later described as the most complete and rapid cessation of ambient sound he had experienced in decades of mountain fieldwork, not a gradual thinning of background noise as the team's presence registered with the wildlife in the surrounding area, a simultaneous and total shutdown that covered a radius of forest significantly larger than the team's immediate position, the kind of acoustic displacement that indicates the presence of something that the local wildlife recognizes as a predator of sufficient significance to trigger a unified silence response across multiple species at once. The footage from the investigation that Trapper identified as his most frightening experience documents a sequence of events across approximately 4 hours of active fieldwork that the Mountain Monsters production had never captured in any comparable form across the prior seasons of the show. The opening phase of the investigation footage is consistent with what the broadcast episodes had established as the show's standard field documentation. The team moving through the investigation area, calling out observations, responding to instrument readings, and establishing the baseline evidence picture before the active phase of the hunt began. What the cameras began capturing in the second hour of the investigation is where the footage diverges from anything in the show's prior record. The first significant moment documented on camera occurs without any dramatic buildup or visible trigger, a sudden and complete reorientation of every member of the Ames team toward the same direction simultaneously, without verbal communication between them, in response to something the audio track captures in the infrasound range below the threshold of comfortable human hearing. The team's physical response to that sound, the stiffening of posture, the immediate halt of all movement, the particular quality of stillness that experienced mountain hunters adopt when they have registered a predator stimulus, is visible on camera without any of the standard Mountain Monsters' dramatic framing around it. This was not a television reaction. The cameras then captured what happened when the team advanced toward the source of the infrasound. In the tree line approximately 80 yards from the team's position, movement became visible across multiple camera feeds simultaneously, not the movement of a single entity passing through the frame, but a pattern of movement that indicated multiple presences repositioning in the dark timber in a coordinated manner that the team's experienced hunters recognized immediately as deliberate rather than incidental. What those multiple presences did over the following 90 minutes, the coordinated movement, the vocalizations that the audio equipment captured with a clarity and a complexity that exceeded anything the show had previously recorded, and the specific behavioral pattern that Trapper later described as the detail that frightened him most, is documented on camera in a form that left no member of the team with any ambiguity about what they were experiencing. The broadcast audience saw a version of that night. What they saw was not the version the cameras captured. Across 8 seasons of Mountain Monsters and decades of fieldwork in the Appalachian Mountains before the show existed, Trapper had developed a working understanding of the behavioral boundaries that defined his relationship with whatever inhabited the deep mountain territory his team investigated. Those boundaries had held across every prior investigation, an implicit negotiation between the human presence of the Ames team and the non-human presence of the creatures they were hunting, in which both parties maintained a specific distance that neither crossed without the investigation reaching a natural conclusion. The moment Trapper identified in his final days as the moment that frightened him most was the moment during the investigation documented in this video when that boundary was crossed. Not by the Ames team advancing further into the territory of whatever they were hunting. By whatever they were hunting, advancing into theirs. The cameras documented the moment the coordinated presences in the tree line began moving toward the team's position, rather than maintaining the parallel tracking behavior they had been exhibiting across the prior portion of the investigation. Trapper's response to that movement, visible on camera before any verbal communication between team members, was the response of a man whose decades of experience in those mountains had just told him something that his prior experience had not prepared him to process in real time. He had spent years operating on the understanding that the creatures the Ames team hunted were aware of the human investigators in their territory, were capable of monitoring and responding to that presence with a sophistication that went beyond animal instinct, and maintained a consistent behavioral pattern of avoidance that kept the investigations within a range of danger his experience could account for. What advanced out of that tree line toward the team's position that night was not behaving within that pattern, and what Trapper saw in the quality of that advance, in the deliberateness of it, the patience of it, and the specific directional intention it communicated, was the detail he referenced in his final days as the thing he could never fully set aside after that investigation was over. It was not the size of what came toward them, it was not the speed, it was the intelligence the advance communicated, an intelligence that understood exactly what the Ames team was, exactly what their equipment was capable of documenting, and exactly how close it could come before the investigation would break. It came to that line, and it held there, and it looked at Trapper with the full weight of something that had been in those mountains long before any human institution had been keeping records about what lived there. He never said what looked back at him from the dark, but in his final days he said that whatever it was, it knew him, and that it had known him for longer than he had known it. The question of why Trapper maintained silence about the investigation that scared him most across the years between when it occurred and his final days is not a simple one. The simplest component of the answer is the one that applies to any person operating within a television production framework: the contractual and institutional constraints that govern what cast members of a cable television show can and cannot say publicly about their experiences on that show and the evidence those experiences produced. Those constraints were real, and Trapper operated within them as every Mountain Monsters cast member did. But contractual constraint alone does not account for the specific character of the silence Trapper maintained about this investigation. He was not a man who found silence easy when he believed something important needed to be said, and across his public life he had demonstrated a willingness to push against institutional boundaries when the subject matter was significant enough to justify it. The silence about this investigation was different in character from the ordinary professional discretion he applied to the show's unreleased material. It was a silence that the people closest to him during the final years of his life have described as deliberate in a way that went beyond network compliance. A decision he had made about this specific investigation that was rooted not in contractual obligation, but in a personal reckoning with what the investigation had produced and what saying it publicly would mean. Part of that reckoning was theological. Trapper's relationship to the Appalachian religious tradition, the specific framework within which the communities he worked with understood the presence of powerful non-human beings in the mountain territory, had been shaped by a lifetime of encounter with evidence that pushed against the boundaries of what that framework could comfortably contain. The investigation that scared him most had pushed through those boundaries in a way that forced a personal confrontation with the most serious implications of what he believed about the nature of the things he had spent his career hunting. He was not ready to say those implications out loud for most of the years that followed the investigation. What changed in his final days was the same thing that changes the calculation for anyone approaching the end of their life about what they can afford to leave unsaid. The professional consequences of speaking no longer carried the weight they had. The personal reckoning he had been conducting privately about what the investigation meant and what it implied about the nature of the beings the Ames team had encountered across all the prior seasons had reached a conclusion, and the people he trusted most, the individuals who were present with him in those final days and who have shared his words in the time since, heard him say what he had spent years deciding how to say. He said it was real. He said it was not not an animal. He said what came toward them that night in the tree line knew exactly what it was doing. And he said that the thing that frightened him most was not what it was. It was that it had always been there, and it had always known they were coming, and it had been deciding for a very long time how close it was willing to let them get. In September 2014, the Mountain Monsters crew filmed an episode in Wirt County, West Virginia, investigating reports of the Yahoo cryptid that would never air on Destination America. Subscribe now because what the cameras captured during that investigation was so dangerous, so controversial, and so disturbing that network executives banned the episode immediately, ordered all footage locked away, and threatened legal action against anyone who discussed what happened. For 9 years, the episode remained hidden until leaked footage surfaced online in 2023. This is what really happened during the banned Mountain Monsters episode that the network desperately tried to keep secret. Mountain Monsters premiered on Destination America in 2013, following a team of Appalachian hunters and trappers known as the Appalachian Investigators of Mysterious Sightings, or AIMS team, as they tracked cryptids throughout the mountain regions of West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and surrounding states. The show featured team leader John Trapper Tice, along with investigators Jeff Headley, William Wild Bill Neff, Joseph Huckleberry Lott, Jacob Buck Lowe, and Willie McQuillian. The format combined cryptid investigation with trap building, following the team as they interviewed witnesses, searched remote wilderness areas, and constructed elaborate traps attempting to capture creatures including Bigfoot variants, the Mothman, lizard demons, and other Appalachian cryptids. By Season 2 in 2014, the show had developed a successful formula and dedicated following, leading producers to become increasingly ambitious about the creatures they would investigate and the risks the team would take during filming. In late summer 2014, producers planned an episode focusing on the Yahoo, a violent Bigfoot-like creature reported in Wirt County, West Virginia, with a reputation for being far more aggressive than typical Bigfoot encounters. Local legends described the Yahoo not as a shy forest dweller, but as a territorial predator that had allegedly attacked humans, killed livestock brutally, and defended its territory with extreme violence. Multiple witnesses had reported encounters where the Yahoo charged at people rather than fleeing, threw rocks with deadly accuracy, and made terrifying vocalizations that sounded like screaming combined with growling. The AIMS team had investigated aggressive cryptids before, but the Yahoo reports suggested something genuinely dangerous rather than just frightening. Producers were aware of the risks, but believed the team's experience and the dramatic footage potential justified proceeding with the investigation. The plan was to conduct a week-long investigation in the remote Wirt County wilderness, build a large trap designed to contain something extremely strong and violent, and attempt to capture evidence of the Yahoo through nighttime tracking and provocation. What producers didn't anticipate was how quickly the situation would spiral completely out of control, resulting in injuries, production equipment destruction, and footage so disturbing that network legal teams would determine it could never be broadcast. The investigation began in early September 2014, with the team arriving in Wirt County and setting up base camp in an area where Yahoo sightings had been concentrated. Local witnesses warned them that the creature was not like other cryptids they had investigated, that it was genuinely dangerous and had put people in the hospital with injuries from thrown rocks and physical attacks. Trapper dismissed the warnings as exaggeration, confident the team's experience would keep them safe. On the second night of filming, the AIMS team conducted a nighttime investigation in dense forest approximately 2 miles from their base camp, spreading out in pairs with night vision cameras to cover more ground and increase chances of encountering the Yahoo. Wild Bill and Buck were investigating a ravine area where witnesses had reported recent activity when something happened that was captured on both their handheld cameras and a static camera that had been positioned overlooking the ravine. The footage, which would later become the primary reason the episode was banned, shows Wild Bill and Buck hearing something large moving through brush approximately 50 yards from their position. Following standard protocol, they called out attempting to communicate and provoke response. What happened next occurred with shocking speed. A large dark figure emerged from the tree line and charged directly toward Wild Bill and Buck, covering the distance in seconds while both men were scrambling backward trying to retreat. The night vision footage clearly shows both investigators falling as they tried to run, with Wild Bill hitting the ground hard. The figure reached Wild Bill's position while he was down, What the camera captured next was Wild Bill screaming in pain and terror while something off-camera was attacking him. Buck's camera shows him trying to reach Wild Bill but being unable to get close because of the figure that appears to be striking or grabbing Wild Bill repeatedly. The attack lasted approximately 15 seconds before the figure retreated back into darkness. When Buck finally reached Wild Bill, the cameras captured Wild Bill bleeding from multiple injuries, barely conscious, and in severe distress. The footage shows Buck calling frantically for help over radio, trying to assess Wild Bill's injuries while also watching the darkness in case the creature returned. Wild Bill had deep lacerations on his arms and torso that were bleeding heavily, later determined to be consistent with being struck by something with tremendous force or possibly clawed. He had a head injury where he had been knocked to the ground, and he was going into shock from the trauma and blood loss. The rest of the team reached their location within 10 minutes, bringing first aid supplies and helping to stabilize Wild Bill enough to move him. The decision was made to evacuate him immediately to the nearest hospital, rather than waiting for emergency services to navigate the remote location. The cameras captured the chaotic evacuation through dark forest, with Wild Bill being half-carried by team members while everyone watched the darkness expecting another attack at any moment. This footage alone, showing a clear, violent attack on an investigator resulting in serious injuries, was enough to make network executives extremely nervous about airing the episode, but it was only the beginning of what would make the episode unbroadcastable. Wild Bill was transported to Camden Clark Medical Center approximately 45 minutes from the investigation site, arriving in the emergency department around 2 in the morning with injuries that required immediate treatment and raised serious questions among medical staff about what could have caused such trauma. The medical documentation, which later became part of the legal controversy around the episode, showed Wild Bill had sustained 4 deep lacerations on his left forearm, ranging from 4 to 7 inches in length, 2 lacerations on his right shoulder and upper chest, significant bruising across his torso consistent with blunt force trauma, a concussion from the head impact when he fell, and was treated for shock and blood loss. The lacerations required over 40 stitches total to close. Most significantly for the controversy that would follow, the attending physician documented that the wound patterns were unusual and didn't match typical injuries from falls, animal attacks, or accidental trauma from branches or rocks. The lacerations showed characteristics of being caused by something striking with considerable force in a downward motion, creating tears in the skin rather than clean cuts or typical claw marks. This documentation would later become crucial when network lawyers were determining whether the show could be held liable for putting cast members in situations that resulted in serious injury. While Wild Bill was being treated, production supervisors were having emergency discussions about whether to continue filming or shut down the investigation immediately. The standard practice for reality television when cast members are injured is to halt production, conduct safety reviews, and only resume if conditions can be made safe. However, the remaining Ames team members, particularly Trapper, insisted they needed to continue the investigation to document what had attacked Wild Bill and to prove they hadn't fabricated the incident. This created tension between the production team and network executives who were being updated about the situation in real time. The decision was made to pause filming for 24 hours while Wild Bill was evaluated, and while producers assessed whether continuing was safe and legally defensible. During this pause, something happened that would make the episode even more controversial and contribute to it being banned. Several team members, including Buck, who had witnessed the attack firsthand, began questioning whether they should continue putting themselves at risk for a television show. Buck expressed concerns on camera during interviews that what they encountered wasn't just an animal or even a typical cryptid, but something that appeared to be hunting them specifically and targeting them with intelligence and malicious intent. He stated he believed they had provoked something that was now actively trying to hurt or kill them, and that continuing the investigation would lead to someone being seriously injured or killed. Despite Wild Bill's hospitalization and Buck's serious concerns about safety, Trapper made the decision that the team would continue the investigation after the 24-hour pause, arguing that walking away would mean the attack on Wild Bill had been for nothing, and that they had an obligation to document what was in those woods. This decision created the first major conflict in Mountain Monsters history between team members, captured on camera in footage that network executives later determined could not be aired because it showed how production was prioritizing dramatic television over cast safety. The footage shows Buck and Trapper having a heated argument where Buck explicitly states he believes continuing is reckless and potentially fatal, while Trapper insists they can take additional precautions and that they owe it to Wild Bill to finish what they started. Buck ultimately agreed to continue but stated on camera that he was doing so against his better judgment and that if anyone else got hurt, the responsibility would fall on Trapper and the producers who were allowing this to continue. Production made several safety modifications for the continuation of filming. Additional crew members were brought in to maintain visual contact between team members at all times. Medical personnel were on standby closer to the investigation site. Team members were equipped with air horns and other deterrent devices. And critically, team members were authorized to carry firearms for self-defense, something that had not been done on previous Mountain Monsters investigations. This last modification would prove to be the most controversial aspect of the entire episode, and a primary reason it could never be broadcast. On the third night after Wild Bill's attack, the team returned to the investigation area with modified protocols and additional safety measures. The plan was to set up a large trap structure designed to contain something extremely strong, then conduct nighttime surveillance and tracking to document the Yahoo's behavior and potentially lure it toward the trap. Trapper, Buck, Huckleberry, and Jeff participated in this phase, while Willie remained at base camp monitoring communications. What happened during this third night created footage that was so problematic from legal, ethical, and broadcast standards perspectives that network executives immediately ordered all footage seized and locked away. The team had been working on the trap construction for several hours when they began hearing vocalizations from multiple directions surrounding their position. The sounds were described as howling mixed with screaming, coming from at least 3 different locations in a pattern that suggested coordination rather than random animal sounds. Trapper made the decision to split the team into pairs to investigate the different sound sources, hoping to triangulate the Yahoo's location. This decision, made against the safety protocols that had been established after Wild Bill's injury, put team members in vulnerable positions separated from each other in darkness, while something that had already demonstrated violent intent was in the area. Approximately 20 minutes after the team split up to investigate the surrounding vocalizations, a gunshot rang out in the darkness, captured on multiple cameras from different positions and creating a moment that would define why this episode could never be broadcast. The audio from multiple sources clearly captured a single gunshot followed immediately by Buck's voice screaming for everyone to get to his location immediately. The footage shows team members running through dark forest toward Buck's position, with cameras capturing the chaos and fear as everyone tried to navigate through dense woods while not knowing what had happened or whether there was ongoing danger. When cameras reached Buck's location, the footage shows him standing over something on the ground with his rifle still raised, clearly in shock, and Jeff arriving moments later asking what happened. The footage, which has been described by people who have seen it, but which has never been publicly released, apparently shows a large, dark figure lying motionless on the ground, approximately 10 feet from Buck's position. Buck's account, captured on camera in the immediate aftermath, states that he was investigating the vocalizations when the figure charged at him from close range, giving him only seconds to react. He states he feared for his life based on what had happened to Wild Bill and fired one shot at center mass to stop the charge. The figure went down immediately and did not move. The footage from the next several minutes is reportedly the most controversial in the entire episode, showing the team's reaction as they approached the figure to determine what Buck had shot. Multiple cameras captured the scene from different angles as team members used flashlights to examine what was on the ground. According to descriptions from people who have seen the unaired footage, what the cameras revealed was not clearly a known animal, not clearly a person in a costume, but something ambiguous enough that it created massive legal and ethical problems for the network. If Buck had shot an unknown animal, that would create wildlife law violations and potential criminal charges. If he had shot what appeared to be a person, even if that person was in a costume and charging at him, that would create potential manslaughter or assault charges. If he had shot an actual cryptid, that would raise questions about why the body wasn't preserved and turned over to scientific authorities. The ambiguity of what was actually shown on camera made the footage impossible to broadcast without creating catastrophic liability for everyone involved. The production team made the decision to shut down filming immediately and secure the scene. Local authorities were not initially contacted, a decision that would later become extremely controversial. Instead, production supervisors contacted network executives and legal teams who began emergency consultations about what to do with the footage and how to handle the situation. In the 72 hours following the shooting incident, Destination America network executives, production company lawyers, and crisis management consultants engaged in intensive damage control to prevent the Mountain Monsters episode from becoming a public relations disaster and potential legal catastrophe. The first action taken was securing all footage from the investigation under lock and key, with explicit orders that no copies were to be made and no footage was to be reviewed without legal counsel present. All crew members present during the investigation, including the Ames team members and production staff, were required to sign expanded non-disclosure agreements with severe financial penalties for discussing what had occurred during filming. These NDAs reportedly included liquidated damages clauses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per violation, effectively silencing everyone involved through the threat of financial ruin if they spoke publicly about the banned episode. Wild Bill, who was still recovering from his injuries in the hospital, was visited by network representatives who secured his signature on similar agreements and reportedly offered financial compensation beyond his standard appearance fees in exchange for his cooperation in keeping the incident confidential. The question of what to do about the shooting itself and whether to involve law enforcement created intense internal debate. Legal counsel advised that if what Buck shot was an animal, West Virginia wildlife laws would require reporting the incident and likely result in criminal charges for hunting violations given that the shooting occurred at night, potentially involved an endangered or protected species if it was determined to be an unknown primate, and occurred in an area where hunting may not have been permitted. If what Buck shot appeared to be a person, or could be interpreted as a person in a costume, failure to report the shooting could constitute obstruction of justice or accessory after the fact to a potential crime. The decision was ultimately made to not involve local law enforcement based on the argument that the figure had charged at Buck in what was determined to be legitimate self-defense, that no body could be located when the area was searched the following day during daylight hours, suggesting whatever was shot had retreated and survived the encounter, and that involving authorities would inevitably lead to public disclosure of the footage, which would create the exact liability exposure the network was trying to avoid. This decision, while legally questionable, was based on risk assessment that the potential consequences of reporting were worse than the potential consequences of not reporting. To justify the decision not to report, extensive searches were conducted of the area where the shooting occurred, documented through photographs and video that would serve as evidence that the network had acted reasonably in determining no crime had occurred. These searches found no body, no blood trail, and no physical evidence that anything had been shot and killed. Network executives and legal teams identified multiple independent reasons why the banned Mountain Monsters episode could not be aired under any circumstances, creating a situation where the footage became permanently locked away rather than simply delayed or edited for content. The primary legal concern involved liability for Wild Bill's injuries and the question of whether the network had exercised adequate duty of care in protecting cast members from foreseeable harm. Reality television productions have legal obligations to maintain reasonably safe working conditions for participants, and courts have found networks liable when cast members are injured during filming if it can be shown the production created or failed to mitigate unreasonable risks. Wild Bill's injuries were serious enough that if the episode aired showing the circumstances that led to the attack, it could be used as evidence in a potential lawsuit that the production had knowingly put cast members in dangerous situations for entertainment value. Even if Wild Bill chose not to sue, regulatory agencies or insurance companies could potentially take action based on the documented safety failures. The shooting incident created even more severe legal problems. Regardless of what Buck actually shot, the footage showing a cast member discharging a firearm during production raised questions about weapons protocols, safety procedures, and whether the network could be held responsible for whatever consequences resulted. If the shooting was legally justified self-defense, airing the footage could still create public relations disasters and potentially subject Buck to criminal investigation if prosecutors decided to review the case. If the shooting was not justified, airing footage documenting a potential crime would make the network complicit. The ambiguity of what was shown in the footage made it impossible to defend airing the episode from any angle. Beyond the shooting itself, the footage showing team members arguing about safety and expressing concerns about continuing the investigation would directly contradict the network's position that adequate safety measures were in place, broadcasting Buck's on-camera statement that continuing the investigation was reckless and could lead to someone being killed, followed immediately by footage of the shooting incident, would create devastating evidence of negligence if legal action was taken. The ethical concerns were equally prohibitive. Destination America marketed mountain monsters as entertainment about cryptid hunting, maintaining ambiguity about whether the creatures were real or the show was staged performance. The banned episode's footage was too graphic and too realistic to maintain that ambiguity. If what was shown was real, airing it would be broadcasting actual violence and potential death for entertainment. If what was shown was staged, it would constitute fraud against viewers and potentially violate FCC regulations about disclosure of staged content in unscripted programming. Network standards and practices departments determined the violence shown was too intense for the network's target demographic and time slots regardless of context. For 9 years, the banned Mountain Monsters episode remained locked away with only network executives, legal team members, and participants knowing what the footage contained. The Ames team continued filming subsequent seasons without publicly acknowledging the banned episode, though observers noted format changes after season 2, reducing aggressive cryptid confrontations and increasing safety protocols. Wild Bill recovered from injuries and returned to the show, but was noticeably more cautious and refused to discuss Wirt County when asked by fans. Buck remained with the show but showed less enthusiasm for night investigations and became more vocal about safety concerns during filmed episodes. Then, in March 2023, partial footage from the banned episode appeared on social media platforms and file-sharing sites, uploaded by anonymous sources and spreading rapidly through paranormal investigation communities and Mountain Monsters fan groups before network legal teams could issue takedown notices. The leaked footage was incomplete and lower resolution than broadcast quality, suggesting it had been copied from production files rather than master footage, but showed enough key incidents to confirm years of rumors about why the episode was banned. The leaked material included approximately 8 minutes showing Wild Bill's attack and immediate aftermath with graphic injuries visible. The heated argument between Buck and Trapper about continuing the investigation, with Buck explicitly stating someone would be killed. Audio of the gunshot and chaotic response with team members screaming and running through darkness, and brief, unclear footage of something on the ground that viewers debated endlessly. Notably absent from leaked material was any clear view of the figure Buck shot, suggesting whoever leaked the footage either didn't have access to that specific content or deliberately withheld the most legally problematic material. Destination America issued immediate DMCA takedown notices and released a brief statement acknowledging unreleased Mountain Monsters footage had been leaked without authorization, investigating how the breach occurred, but notably did not deny the footage was authentic or address specific content shown. Ames team members did not comment publicly, presumably bound by non-disclosure agreements, though fans noted Wild Bill's social media presence decreased significantly after the leak and Buck deleted his Facebook account entirely.
Before his death, John Trapper Tice, the fearless leader of Mountain Monsters, hinted at something far darker than the world ever saw on television. He claimed the show had stumbled onto a truth so disturbing the footage was buried and the team was told never to speak of it again. But now, years later, evidence has surfaced, suggesting Trapper may have been right all along, that something ancient, something inhuman, was watching them during every hunt. Tonight, we uncover the dark revelation Trapper left behind and why the truth about Mountain Monsters was never meant to be seen. If you think you know this story, think again. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear changes everything. Before Mountain Monsters became one of the most talked about paranormal shows in America, John Trapper Tice was already a legend in West Virginia. Born and raised among the fog-drenched hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, Trapper knew those woods better than anyone. He served his country in the U.S. Army, worked as a skilled tracker and outdoorsman, and carried with him an unshakable respect for nature and for the things most people refused to believe lived within it. To locals, Trapper wasn't a TV star. He was the man you called when something strange howled at the edge of your property and wouldn't go away. When Mountain Monsters first aired in 2013, Trapper was reluctant. He wasn't after fame. He wanted proof. He wanted the world to understand that the stories passed down through generations about the Mothman, the Wampus Beast, and the Grafton Monster weren't just campfire tales. They were warnings. Every creature his Ames team hunted was tied to a deeper mystery hidden in the Appalachian wilderness, and Trapper swore that the further they went, the stranger it got. Crew members would later say that off camera. Trapper kept notebooks filled with sketches, coordinates, and coded notes. He believed the creatures they were finding weren't random. They were connected through something ancient. On one page, he scrawled the words, "The signs are older than the people." Those words would haunt his team long after he was gone. By the time the cameras rolled into their third season, fans saw a leader, but those who worked beside him saw a man burdened by what he'd uncovered. He began telling producers that something didn't feel right, that their expeditions were being guided, not by curiosity, but by something that wanted them out there. He'd later confide in his closest friends that there were things in those woods even he couldn't explain, and that some truths weren't meant for television. To the world, the Appalachian investigators of mysterious sightings, or AIMS, looked like a tight-knit band of hunters chasing legends. But behind the scenes, Trapper's team was operating more like a unit than a TV cast. Buck, Huckleberry, Jeff, Willie, and Wild Bill weren't just country boys with cameras. They were trained in tracking, mapping, and night operations. Each had a job, from navigation to trap construction. And under Trapper's command, they functioned with precision. But what the audience didn't see was the fear creeping in behind their laughter. From the beginning, Trapper kept strict rules on every hunt. Never split up, always keep a clear escape path, and never ever speak the creature's name aloud in the woods. Those rules weren't just for show. They came from years of strange encounters that Trapper refused to discuss publicly. He often said that the things they were hunting weren't animals, they were guardians. In private, the team admitted they felt watched during almost every shoot. Jeff, their tech expert, once told a local radio station that his motion sensors and cameras picked up movement long before the crew arrived, as if something was waiting. As mountain monsters grew in popularity, Trapper's concern grew with it. Producers wanted more danger, more confrontation, and more spectacle. But every time the team pushed deeper into the woods, the phenomena got worse. Voices echoing from tree lines, rocks being thrown from impossible angles, and once, an entire camera battery drained the instant Trapper mentioned a creature's name. He began warning the crew, "We're getting too close to something we don't understand." His tone shifted from curiosity to unease. He wasn't chasing monsters anymore. He was chasing answers to questions that terrified him. And when one unexplained encounter left a crew member shaken enough to quit, Trapper confided quietly to the others, "This isn't folklore. It's something else, and it doesn't want to stay hidden anymore." In late 2016, the Mountain Monsters crew began filming what was supposed to be a routine investigation deep in the Tigard Valley. It was a fog-heavy week, and Trapper had become obsessed with a specific area that wasn't even on their filming schedule. He said he'd found something in old county record, a cluster of abandoned mining tunnels that didn't appear on any modern maps. The team wasn't sure what he was looking for, but Trapper was convinced that one of their creature cases, the smoke wolf, originated there. He claimed it wasn't a single beast at all, but a manifestation of something older, something summoned. The Ames crew reluctantly followed, setting up cameras near the collapsed mine entrance. The air inside was thick, stale, and carried a strange metallic odor. Trapper and Buck went in first with night vision, while the others waited outside monitoring audio. Only a few minutes in, the crew radioed that their feed was flickering and audio was cutting out. Then came a series of sharp, rhythmic bangs echoing from inside the mine, like someone was knocking on steel. When Trapper emerged, his face was pale. He said there was something down there. Not human, not animal. He refused to describe what he saw, but ordered everyone to shut down the shoot immediately. Later that night, around the campfire, he made the team swear not to tell the producers exactly what had happened. Jeff, their tech guy, tried to review the footage from the GoPro mounted on Trapper's vest, but the file was completely corrupted. Static, white noise, and a strange low hum that caused the laptop to overheat. That episode was quietly shelved. The network never aired it, never even listed it in the archives. But according to Buck, Trapper kept a copy of the damaged footage on an encrypted drive. He told him, "If anything ever happens to me, you'll know where to look." That was the night Trapper stopped calling their hunts adventure. From that point on, he called them investigations into what shouldn't exist. After the Tigard Valley expedition, something about Trapper changed. Visibly, he wasn't the same man fans remembered cracking jokes or shouting orders with that familiar spark. The rest of the Ames crew noticed it too. His voice grew quieter, his planning more cautious, and his nights longer. He'd sit by the fire with a small notebook, writing furiously under the light of a headlamp, muttering to himself about patterns in the dark. Buck once asked what he was doing, and Trapper said, "It's all connected, Buck. The creatures, the tunnels, even the lights in the sky. Someone or something built this map a long time ago, and we've been walking straight into it." Weeks after that cursed shoot, the network requested all raw footage to prepare for editing. But one of the hard drives was missing. It contained the main body cams, thermal imaging, and the GoPro Trapper wore inside the mine. The network assumed it had been misplaced or damaged, but Jeff later confessed that Trapper himself had locked it away in his cabin, refusing to let anyone see it. "There are things people aren't ready to see," he reportedly said. "And if this gets out, it won't just ruin the show, it'll ruin lives." The Ames team decided to move on, filming other episodes in safer, more familiar regions. But the events in Tigard Valley followed them. Their radio frequencies would sometimes pick up distorted voices when no one was transmitting. Drones lost control mid-flight, and more than once, Jeff's motion sensors triggered at impossible angles, capturing humanoid heat signatures suspended above the tree line. Then came the night that fans still whisper about, the night the woods went silent. During a later investigation in Braxton County, West Virginia, the team experienced what they described as a total sound blackout. Every frog, cricket, and bird in the area stopped making noise all at once. The temperature dropped nearly 15 degrees in seconds. Willie remembered the firelight dimming unnaturally, as if something massive had moved between them and the flames. For nearly an hour, they stayed frozen in place, hearing only a low vibration that made their chest cavities buzz. Cameras caught nothing but faint distortion, and then, as quickly as it started, the forest came back to life. When the footage was reviewed days later, producers found something chilling. 3 frames of video showing a massive silhouette standing behind Trapper, nearly 8 feet tall, with a faint light radiating from its outline. The frames were dismissed as glitches, and the episode was edited heavily before broadcast. But the uncut version, kept by Jeff, revealed something the public never saw. A clear voice captured on the audio saying Trapper's name. After that night, he reportedly told the crew, "We're not hunting monsters anymore. We're trespassing." From that moment forward, Trapper seemed to believe someone or something was watching them. And the next season of Mountain Monsters would take an even darker turn, one that blurred the line between reality and something the human mind was never meant to comprehend. By 2018, Mountain Monsters had become one of the most popular paranormal shows on cable TV. But behind the cameras, the Ames team wasn't celebrating. Trapper's health was beginning to fail, and while the network wanted more big creature hunts and dramatic chases, the old tracker's focus had shifted entirely. He no longer wanted to entertain, he wanted to warn. During those final months of filming, he confided more and more in Buck and Jeff. He told them that something had changed in the woods since they started airing the show. "The mountains remember," he said quietly one night. "When you shine a light on what's meant to stay dark, something always shines back." The crew didn't know how to take that. They'd spent years chasing folklore, but Trapper's tone carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. After one shoot, Buck followed Trapper back to his cabin in Greenbrier County. Inside, the walls were covered in topographical maps of West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio, each pinned with strings, photographs, and strange symbols drawn in red marker. Some matched carvings the team had found on rocks during past hunts. Others looked like ancient sigils. At the center of it all, circled 3 times, was the word doorway. That's when Trapper revealed he'd been keeping a private journal for years, not about the episodes, but about what wasn't allowed to air. He called it the Appalachian Codex. Inside were accounts of strange electromagnetic pulses that preceded sightings, mutilated animal remains that vanished before authorities arrived, and even unmarked helicopters circling their filming zones the day after certain investigations. Buck later said that Trapper looked terrified when he spoke about the mine from Tigard Valley, the one that started it all. He claimed that every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear the metallic banging echoing in his head. But what chilled Buck most wasn't the fear in Trapper's eyes. It was the conviction. Trapper truly believed they had uncovered something ancient and powerful that predated human settlement in Appalachia. In one of his final recordings, found after his passing, Trapper's voice cracked as he spoke into an old camcorder. "They'll say it's folklore. They'll say it's edited for TV. But there's something under those hills that doesn't belong to us. Never did. And if this show keeps digging, they'll come looking for who started it." After Trapper's death in 2019, his family found the codex hidden beneath the floorboards of his cabin. Pages were missing. Others had been burned around the edges, as if someone had tried to destroy them but stopped at the last minute. The surviving notes mentioned a pattern in 7 valleys and the name that cannot be spoken. The surviving Ames members refused to speak publicly about what was in the journal, but months later, fans began noticing subtle changes in their interviews. Less talk about monsters, more talk about forces. When asked if they'd ever found the truth Trapper was looking for, Buck's voice trembled as he said, "He found it, but it's not something we should have found at all." Whatever John Trapper Tice uncovered before he died, it wasn't a creature. It was a secret, one that even in death he seemed desperate to keep from ever reaching the light. After Trapper's passing, the Ames team struggled to continue without their leader. The showrunners wanted to honor his memory by dedicating new episodes to his legacy. But behind the scenes, Buck, Huckleberry, and Jeff were wrestling with something far darker than grief. The contents of a small black hard drive they found sealed inside Trapper's old gun safe. Written on the tape in red marker were 3 words: "Do not open yet." For days, Buck avoided it, but curiosity finally won out. One night, alone in his garage, he plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen flickered before displaying corrupted thumbnails, video files with distorted names, timestamps from the night of the Tigard Valley shoot. Buck clicked one. At first, nothing but static. Then, faintly, the image of Trapper appeared, his face illuminated by a single flashlight beam. His voice was hushed and trembling. "If you're seeing this," he said, "then I didn't make it to tell you in person. Don't go back to the mine. Don't dig deeper. You'll wake it up again." The footage cut to shaky night vision, brief glimpses of symbols carved into the tunnel walls, shapes that looked burned rather than etched. The final clip showed what appeared to be a shadow moving against the light source, crawling along the walls and ceiling with unnatural speed. Then, a burst of white noise and silence. Buck unplugged the drive and threw it into a drawer, but the damage was done. Within days, members of the crew reported strange malfunctions with their phones and cameras, like an unseen signal was interfering. Producers from the network demanded the footage, but Buck refused to hand it over. Shortly after, an anonymous email arrived in the production office reading, "The Tigard files are property of the U.S. Department of Forestry Research. Do not release." Jeff believed the email was fake, until 2 men in unmarked vehicles appeared outside his home days later, claiming to be consultants. They asked about the hard drive and about what John Tice may have recorded without clearance. The men left without incident, but the warning was clear. Whatever Trapper captured that night wasn't meant to be seen. That was when the Ames team realized Mountain Monsters wasn't just a show anymore. It was evidence, and someone powerful wanted that evidence buried forever. In early 2020, several months after Trapper's passing, the Ames crew quietly regrouped to shoot what was supposed to be a tribute episode. It was meant to honor his life, revisiting old locations, sharing stories, and reflecting on the years spent together under his leadership. But what happened that night never aired on television, and to this day, only fragments of the story have leaked through whispers from the crew. They chose a secluded area in the heart of Greenbrier County, not far from Trapper's cabin. According to Jeff, the team wanted to perform a simple campfire memorial near one of the spots Trapper had marked on his map, a location labeled only as the Gateway. They brought minimal equipment, just a few cameras, and planned to spend one night. But the moment they arrived, things felt off. The woods were unnaturally quiet, and the air had that same metallic taste Trapper once described after the Tygart Valley encounter. As the fire crackled and the team shared memories, Jeff's EMF meter began to spike. He assumed it was faulty equipment until every electronic device on site, from cameras to flashlights, suddenly shut off. A complete blackout. They sat in pitch darkness for nearly 30 seconds until Buck's lantern flickered back to life, revealing something that made his stomach drop. The trees surrounding the clearing were marked with the same symbols Trapper had drawn in his journal. Then came the sound, a low, distorted hum that seemed to rise from the ground itself. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. The noise vibrated in their chests, a deep resonance that made their vision blur. And within that hum, Jeff swore he heard a whisper, one that said Trapper's name. The next morning, the crew left in silence. None of the cameras had recorded a thing, even though they had been rolling before the blackout. Every SD card had been wiped clean, the data unrecoverable. That episode, meant to celebrate Trapper's life, was never released. And according to Buck, it wasn't because of technical failure. It's like something didn't want that night remembered, he said later. Like it took the memory right out of the air. That was the last time the Ames team filmed in that part of West Virginia. And for some of them, it was the night they truly began to believe Trapper hadn't been chasing monsters. He'd been warning them. Not long after the blackout incident, whispers began spreading among crew members that the network itself was under pressure to end mountain monsters quietly. Several editors who had worked on the series were suddenly reassigned, and key footage from the last season mysteriously vanished from the studio server. One technician later admitted that he was ordered to delete all clips related to the Tygart mine and Trapper's final messages. The official reason? Archival consolidation. But insiders claimed it was far more sinister. Buck received an unmarked package at his home around this time. A burned CD containing a single audio file. When he played it, all he could hear was static, until a faint voice emerged beneath the noise. It was unmistakably Trapper's, whispering, "Don't let them close the door." Within a week, the channel announced an indefinite hiatus for the show. Publicly, they said it was due to production restructuring. Privately, those who knew Trapper's warnings understood exactly what had happened. The monsters weren't the threat anymore. The truth was, in the years since his passing, fans still mourn John Trapper Tice as a legend of Appalachian folklore. But for those who worked beside him, the weight of his final secret still lingers. Buck has refused interviews. Huckleberry rarely speaks publicly. Yet at conventions, when the subject of Trapper's lost investigation comes up, there's always that brief, haunted silence, like they know something the rest of us don't. Rumors persist that Trapper's hidden journal, the Appalachian Codex, contained coordinates, 7 in total, forming a pattern across West Virginia's coal belt. Some claim those points mark ancient burial mounds, others entrances to something deeper. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. The man who dedicated his life to chasing monsters may have found the biggest one of all. A secret buried under the mountains themselves, guarded by something that never wanted to be found. And maybe, just maybe, it still watches from the trees.
Buck Lowe has hunted the Appalachian Mountains for 30 years, tracked every animal in West Virginia: bear, deer, cougar. He grew up hearing his grandfather's stories about something else in those woods, something that walks on 2 legs, something 9 feet tall. Buck respected the stories but never truly believed. Until October 2023 in the Tygart Valley. 20 feet away from him stood a creature covered in dark hair, 9 feet tall, looking directly at him with eyes that reflected his flashlight. Bigfoot was real, and Buck's reaction was captured on camera. Subscribe, because what happened next will give you chills. His voice shaking, hands trembling, pure fear documented. The thermal cameras captured it too. A massive heat signature right where Buck said, "This isn't acting. This is genuine terror. This is Buck Lowe face to face with Bigfoot, and his reaction changes everything. The Tygart Valley sits deep in Randolph County, West Virginia, in the heart of Appalachian territory. Dense forest covers steep terrain for miles. The nearest town is 40 minutes away on winding mountain roads. Locals call one particular area the Dark Hollow because sunlight barely penetrates the thick canopy. This region has a history. Native American legends speak of wild men living in these mountains. Sightings date back to the 1800s when settlers first moved through the area. In September 2023, multiple recent reports reached local authorities. Hunters discovered massive footprints near creek beds. A local farmer named Dale Henderson lost 3 calves in 1 week, killed in an unusual manner that didn't match bear or cougar attacks. The tracks found near his property measured 18 inches long. Tree structures appeared overnight, branches and logs arranged in deliberate patterns that weren't natural. Campers reported strange vocalizations echoing through the valley at night, deep guttural sounds that didn't match any known animal. Dale Henderson contacted the Ames team directly. "Something's out here and it ain't natural," he told Buck over the phone. Dale described seeing a large figure crossing his field at dusk, moving upright on 2 legs. He estimated the height at 8 to 9 feet. It was covered in dark hair and moved with surprising speed despite its massive size. 2 other locals confirmed similar sightings in the same area within the past month. Buck Lowe studied the reports carefully. He examined topographical maps of the region, identifying likely travel corridors for a large creature, water sources where it might drink, caves and rock overhangs that could provide shelter. Buck's 30 years of tracking experience told him this was textbook Bigfoot territory. Dense cover, multiple water sources, abundant food, and minimal human presence. The team assembled for the investigation. Buck would lead as team leader, the role he took after Trapper's passing. Wild Bill served as second in command. Huckleberry handled tech and thermal imaging equipment. Jeff Headley provided historical research. Willie McQuillian filmed everything. They brought full equipment, thermal imaging cameras, night vision, audio recorders, and trail cameras. The plan was straightforward. Split into 2 groups for better coverage. Buck, Wild Bill, and Willie would take the North Ridge. Huckleberry and Jeff would approach from the South Valley. They'd coordinate via radio, set up thermal monitoring stations, and use calls to elicit responses from any creatures in the area. The rendezvous point was base camp by midnight. October weather provided perfect conditions. Temperature in the 40s, clear sky, nearly full moon. Good visibility, but cold enough to keep animals active. Buck felt optimistic as they geared up. "If it's out here, we'll find it tonight." At 7:30 p.m., the teams split at the trailhead. Buck's group headed north into dense forest, climbing the steep ridgeline. Huckleberry's team took the lower valley route. Radio check confirmed communication was working. "Stay sharp, stay together," Buck said before they separated. By 8:15, Buck's group found fresh tracks crossing a muddy section of trail, clearly bipedal with 5 toes. The prints measured 17 inches long and 7 inches wide. Stride length suggested 6 to 7 foot steps. Too large for human, too humanoid for bear. Buck examined them closely. These are fresh, maybe an hour old. The trail led deeper into forest, away from established paths. Buck used his tracking skills, noting broken branches at 7 to 8 foot height. Something large had passed through recently. The brush was still bent. Wild Bill followed close behind. Whatever made these is big. At 8:45, they discovered a tree structure. Logs and branches arranged in a deliberate teepee formation. Fresh breaks on the branches. This was a classic Bigfoot territorial marker. "This is what we've been looking for," Buck said. Willie captured everything on camera. Huckleberry radioed from the south team. They were hearing strange vocalizations echoing through the valley. Deep, guttural sounds. Not coyote, not wolf, coming from Buck's direction. "Whatever's up there knows you're there," Huckleberry warned. By 9:10, the tracks led uphill toward the ridge into even denser forest. Visibility was decreasing. Wild Bill suggested turning back, but Buck wanted to continue. "We're close. I can feel it." The terrain changed to rocky outcroppings with large boulders creating a maze. Caves and crevices everywhere. Perfect hiding spots for something massive. At 9:35, Buck made a decision. He would scout ahead alone to check a cave entrance. "Give me 5 minutes, he told the team. Wild Bill was reluctant, but agreed. Willie filmed as Buck disappeared into the darkness with only his flashlight. What happened next would change Buck's life forever. At 9:38 p.m., Buck moved alone toward a large cave opening. His flashlight beam swept across rocks, searching for signs of habitation, hair samples, scat, anything. Years of hunting experience guided every careful step. Then the smell hit him. Overwhelming musky odor like wet dog mixed with something wilder. Buck recognized it immediately. "Oh God, it's here," he whispered into his radio. He didn't wait for a response. The smell was getting stronger with each step toward the cave entrance. A sound stopped him cold. Deep, heavy breathing. Rhythmic and controlled. Coming from his left, not the cave, behind a large boulder. Buck froze completely. That breathing sounded intelligent, aware. Buck turned slowly and swung his flashlight left. The beam crossed trees, then caught something, a dark mass between the trunks, 20 feet away. His flashlight found it, and his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. The creature stood fully upright, massive, easily 9 feet tall, shoulders broader than any man, covered in dark brown, almost black hair, arms hanging past its knees, but the face stopped Buck's breath. Less hair than the body, dark skin visible, flat nose, wide nostrils, prominent brow ridge, and the eyes. The eyes caught his flashlight and reflected back like animal eyeshine, yellowish amber, looking directly at Buck. Neither moved. Buck and the creature locked eyes. Buck's flashlight remained steady on its face. The creature didn't flinch from the light, just stared back. Buck could see its chest rising and falling with each breath. This wasn't a costume. This wasn't a man. This was something else, and Buck's hand began trembling. The flashlight beam shook. "Oh my God," he whispered. His legs wouldn't move. His heart pounded visibly in his chest. The camera 40 feet back captured everything. Buck's pure shock, his frozen stance, his trembling hands. The creature stood completely still. No aggression, no fear, just observing Buck with intelligence in those amber eyes. Buck felt it studying him, thinking. 6 seconds felt like hours. Then the creature shifted its weight slightly and took one step sideways, never breaking eye contact, moving toward denser cover, and then it was gone. Willie's camera filmed from 40 feet back. He couldn't see what Buck saw in the darkness, but he captured Buck's reaction perfectly, and that's what matters. Buck's voice came through clearly on the audio. "Oh my God." Then again, "It's real. It's right there." His voice shaking, breaking, not acting, genuine shock. Years of skepticism shattered in seconds. The camera documented Buck's physical response. His knees buckled slightly. He caught himself, stumbling. His flashlight dropped briefly and he scrambled to recover it. Even from 40 feet away, his hands were visibly shaking. Body language showed pure fear. Buck took a step backward and stumbled over a root, nearly falling. He caught himself on a tree but couldn't look away. His flashlight beam trembled violently. Every instinct screamed run, but Buck forced himself to stay. He reached for his radio with his left hand while keeping the flashlight on the creature. His hand shook too much. He dropped the radio. When he bent to pick it up and looked back up, the creature was gone. "No, no, no, where'd it go?" Panic filled his voice. He spun in circles, flashlight sweeping frantically. Wild Bill came running. "Buck, what happened?" He found Buck standing there, flashlight sweeping wildly. "It was right there," Buck pointed. 20 feet, Bill, 20 feet. "What was? What did you see?" Wild Bill asked. Buck's answer came tumbling out. "Bigfoot, Bill. I saw Bigfoot. 9 feet tall, covered in hair. It was looking at me, right in the eyes, Bill. It was real. It was right there." Wild Bill had known Buck for decades. He'd never seen him like this. Buck doesn't scare easily. Buck doesn't exaggerate. If Buck said he saw it, Wild Bill believed him completely. Okay, you're all right," Wild Bill said calmly, calling the rest of the team. Buck had to sit down on a rock, adrenaline crashing, legs weak, hands still shaking. "I've been hunting these things for years," he said quietly. "Always believed they were out here, but seeing one, that's different. That changes everything." Willie's primary camera footage shows Buck approaching the cave, his flashlight visible in the darkness. Then his posture changes suddenly. His entire body tenses. The flashlight beam focuses on one spot and holds there for several seconds. Then the reaction begins, all captured on film. The audio analysis reveals Buck's voice clearly recorded saying, "Oh my God," multiple times. Heavy breathing is audible. Radio fumbling sounds. But there's something else. A deep, low rumble. Not human. Not Buck. Something else was there. Huckleberry's thermal camera from the ridge shows Buck's heat signature clearly. And something else. A large heat signature appears near Buck behind the boulder area. It registers warmer than ambient temperature, suggesting a living mammal. The signature is roughly human-shaped but much larger, 8 to 9 feet tall, standing upright. The thermal shows both signatures stationary for several seconds. Then the larger one shifts position, moves left toward the trees, and disappears from thermal view. Too fast for something that size. "That's not a person," Huckleberry said. Nothing moves like that. When Willie's footage is enhanced and slowed down, 1 or 2 frames show a dark mass visible between trees when Buck's flashlight swings. The figure appears too tall for a human with wrong proportions. Arms too long. 1 frame captures eyeshine. Amber yellow coloring reflecting from Buck's flashlight at approximately 8 feet high. Not deer, wrong color. Not bear, wrong height. Not human, humans don't have eyeshine. After the encounter, the team searched the area and found physical evidence. A ground depression where something heavy stood, measured 18 inches long with a partial print visible. Casts were made immediately. Hair samples were found on bark at 7-foot height. Dark brown, coarse texture. The hair was sent for analysis. Results came back. Primate, but not gorilla, not chimpanzee, not human. Unknown species. Buck led the team back to the exact spot an hour later. The musky odor was still present. The entire team confirmed the smell. Like wet dog and something else, Wild Bill described it. I've smelled bear before. This ain't bear. The next morning at base camp, Buck sat with coffee. His hands were steadier, but something had changed in him. The team gathered with cameras rolling to hear the full story. I've hunted these mountains 30 years, Buck began. Seen bear, cougar, everything. Nothing prepared me for that. He took a deep breath. It was aware, you understand? Not like an animal, like something in between. Buck described the face in detail. The hair on its body was thick, but the face had less. Could see the skin, dark, leathery, but the eyes, he paused, getting emotional. The eyes looked intelligent. It was studying me. The emotional impact was clear. I've never felt fear like that. Complete primal terror. Every instinct said run, but I couldn't move. Couldn't look away. It's like it held me there. His voice cracked slightly. The emotion was genuine. I've dedicated years to this. Trapper believed. I believed. But seeing it, that's proof. Not just to others. Proof to myself. They're real. Buck admitted he didn't sleep that night. Keep seeing those eyes, wondering what it was thinking. Did it know I wouldn't hurt it? Is that why it just watched? So many questions. But I know what I saw. People can doubt the show, can say we're actors. But I know. I looked into its eyes. 20 feet away. That was real. Nothing can take that from me. Buck's message was clear. They're out there, living in these mountains, avoiding us mostly, but they're there. I'm proof now. I've seen one, and I'll never forget it. Then Buck got emotional talking about Trapper. Wish Trapper was here. He'd understand. He saw things too. Now I know what he felt. That mix of fear and wonder. Trapper. We were right. He had to pause, too overcome to continue. The interview captured a man fundamentally changed by what he witnessed. Buck Lowe wasn't acting. He was processing something that shattered everything he thought he knew about the world. Wild Bill has known Buck for 20 years. Never seen him scared. He was terrified. When I got to him, he was shaking. Couldn't talk straight. Whatever he saw was real. Buck doesn't fake that. Wild Bill described finding Buck standing frozen with his flashlight pointing at trees, saying, "It was right there." Over and over. I looked, didn't see nothing, but Buck saw something. No doubt in my mind. Huckleberry watched from the ridge on thermal. I saw Buck's signature. Then this other signature appears. Bigger, warmer, standing near him. Both just standing there. Then the big one moves and disappears from thermal. Too fast, that shouldn't happen. Huckleberry's technical analysis was definitive. Heat signature was consistent with large primate. Body temperature higher than ambient, suggesting mammal. Size estimated 8 to 9 feet based on thermal reading. This wasn't equipment malfunction. This was something. Jeff Headley focused on the research. This area has history. Sightings going back decades. Native American legends. Buck's encounter fits the pattern. Location, behavior, description. Everything matches historical reports. This is textbook Bigfoot encounter. Jeff's conviction was strong. I've researched hundreds of cases. Buck's is among the most credible. Multiple forms of evidence, thermal, video, witness testimony, hair samples, footprints, all corroborating the same story. This is the real deal. Willie has filmed hundreds of episodes. Never caught Buck like that. That reaction was genuine. You can't fake that fear. The way his voice shook, his hands trembling. That was real terror. Willie's perspective was unique. I couldn't see what Buck saw. Too dark, too far. But I saw him. Saw his reaction. That's the proof. Buck Lowe doesn't scare. Whatever he saw scared him. That tells you everything. The team reached consensus. We all believe Buck. The evidence supports him. Thermal shows something there. Video shows his reaction. Physical evidence matches. This was a real encounter. No doubt among the team. This encounter validated years of work and proved what Trapper always believed. They're really out there. When the episode aired, social media exploded. Hashtag Buck Saw Bigfoot trended immediately. Millions of views within hours. Reaction videos flooded YouTube. The paranormal community divided sharply. Believers responded enthusiastically. Finally, proof! Buck's reaction says everything. You can't fake that fear. The thermal evidence convinced many. Bigfoot researchers analyzed the footage frame by frame. This is the best evidence yet, many declared. Believers pointed to Buck's credibility, 30 years of hunting experience, not prone to exaggeration. His genuine fear was documented, physical shaking visible on camera. The thermal signature provided independent verification. Hair sample analysis showed unknown primate. Everything aligned perfectly. Skeptics argued differently. Reality TV is scripted. Buck's an actor playing a role. Producers told him what to do. They questioned the thermal readings. Could be faked or misinterpreted. The hair sample results were dismissed as contamination. Convenient that there's no clear footage of the creature itself. The skeptics' main complaint focused on the lack of clear images. If it was 20 feet away, why no clear photo? Convenient darkness. Convenient camera angle. Just Buck's reaction and a thermal blob. They demanded better evidence. Believers countered logically. The creature was in shadows. Buck's flashlight wasn't powerful enough for clear photography. The camera was 40 feet back, not in position. Buck didn't have a camera himself. He wasn't prepared for the encounter. This is what a real encounter looks like, not a documentary setup. Even skeptics admitted Buck's reaction seemed genuine. Either he saw something real, or he's an Oscar-worthy actor. Body language experts analyzed the footage. Genuine fear response. Can't fake those micro-expressions. Pupil dilation visible. Voice stress analysis indicates truth. Thermal experts confirmed. Signature is consistent with large primate. The middle ground emerged. Buck saw something. Maybe not Bigfoot, but something scared him genuinely. The encounter itself was real. The identity of the creature remains debatable. This encounter stands out among Bigfoot evidence. Multiple evidence types. Credible witness, documented reaction, technical data, physical samples, historical context. Even serious skeptics take it seriously. Buck couldn't sleep for days after the encounter. He kept replaying the moment, seeing those amber eyes every time he closed his own. The nightmares eventually faded, but the memory never did. The experience changed his entire perspective on hunting. Buck approaches investigations differently now, more cautious, hyper-aware of surroundings. I know they're watching. I know they're intelligent. They're not just cryptids. They're living, thinking beings that deserve respect. The encounter strengthened his relationship with the team. They validated him without question, supported him completely. That's family, Buck says. The shared mission was renewed with greater purpose. Buck feels closer to Trapper now. I understand what he experienced, the weight of knowing. Trapper saw things too. Now I know what he carried. That knowledge, that certainty, it changes you. The connection to Trapper's memory makes the work more meaningful. As team leader, Buck has more confidence. I know we're pursuing real creatures, not just legends, real beings. That makes everything we do matter. It honors Trapper's memory and validates years of effort. Public perception doesn't concern Buck anymore. Some mock him, some believe him. I don't care. I know what I saw. Don't need anyone's approval. I was there, 20 feet away. His confidence is unshakable. Buck's message to others is clear. They're out there. I'm living proof. I looked one in the eyes. If you spend time in deep woods, respect what's there. You're in their territory. They're watching you. The experience reevaluated Buck's priorities. This work matters. Finding truth matters. If they exist, they need protection from people who'd hurt or exploit them. Education, not exploitation. They're not monsters, just creatures trying to survive. 1 year later, Buck reflects on October 2023. Changed my life. Before and after that night. Before I believed. After, I knew. That's everything. He gets emotional. People can doubt. People can mock. I don't care. I was there, 20 feet away, looked into its eyes. It looked back. That's mine. Nobody can take that. His voice breaks. Those eyes. I'll never forget those eyes.